Hi, we're going to talk about sources when we research for our essay papers. So we're going to talk about it over hot coffee and tort. Looks good, doesn't it? Well, we're going to look actually at identifying sources. Do you watch the news and wonder who's telling the right story? And have you ever spoken to somebody, or maybe you are this somebody, who says, I can't tell what's the truth and what's not, so I just don't even watch the news anymore. I just go about my own life. Well, I'm not sure that's a good response either. So is there a way to know what a good source is or not? So we're going to look and we're going to find out. So here's my title, Hot Coffee and Tortes, How to Identify Unbiased Sources. Let's see how all this comes together. Well, wait a minute, stop. Unbiased? Is there really such a thing as unbiased? Everybody has an opinion. Every newspaper and news channel is owned by somebody who has an opinion. Even NPR claims they are unbiased, but don't they have an angle? Don't they have an opinion? Isn't everything slanted toward Democrats or liberals or Republicans or slanted toward this or that? As long as there's an opinion, I don't see how anything can be unbiased. So, how do we find something that's reliable? Well, we can look at the Huffington Post, and we can compare that information to what we see on CNN. And then we can contrast that information to what we watch on Fox News. Oh, that's the wrong Fox, but you got the idea. So here's a situation. For example, a few years ago in 2012, the U.S. Embassy was attacked on 9/11 in Benghazi, Libya. Huffington Post said one thing about the event. Fox News said another thing about the event. And CNN didn't even cover it. Well, you might have to check me on that, but it goes something like that. So what happened? Where's the truth? Why are the different news articles taking different sides? Why did one claim Hillary was right, that it was a reaction to a video? And why did one newscast say it was a terrorist attack? How do you know the truth? Is it possible? Well, let's keep going. Let's look at something else. Do you remember this popular story from 1994? Think about what you remember about this news case. Well, it was 1992. Stella Liebeck spilled scalding McDonald's coffee in her lap and later sued the company, attracting a flood of negative attention. It turns out there was more to the story. So let's continue building on this idea. Can we really trust what we see?
Albuquerque, New Mexico, an elderly woman was severely burned when she spilled a cup of McDonald's coffee in her lap.
An 81-year-old woman has been awarded $2.9 million after she sued McDonald's, claiming their coffee was too hot.
Stella Liebeck spilled just 8 ounces of coffee, but she attracted a flood of attention. The jury's awards set off a media frenzy and became a rallying cry for those who believed our legal system had run amok.
I think it's absurd.
But as her story cycled through newspaper headlines, talk show storylines, and late-night punchlines, one thing was lost: the facts.
This story is the most widely misunderstood story in America. Public perception of it is Stella Liebeck won a lottery. She bought the coffee, she spilled it on herself, and now look, she's a millionaire. When of course the facts are much more complicated than that.
Stella Liebeck was a 79-year-old widow sitting in the passenger seat of a parked car when she was burned on February 27, 1992. She had recently quit her job as a department store clerk and moved to Albuquerque to be near her daughter.
The day that the burns happened, my mother and my nephew went through the drive-through at McDonald's and got breakfast and coffee, and they pulled into the parking lot, and in the Ford Probe there's slanted surfaces everywhere. There's no place to put the coffee. She put it between her knees and lifted the lid off, and In the process of doing that, spilled the coffee and all of the hot liquid went into the sweatsuit that she was wearing and pooled in the seat.
All I remember is trying to get out of the car. I screamed, not realizing I was burned that bad. I knew I was in terrible pain.
The severity of the burns caused Stella Liebeck to go into shock, and her grandson immediately took her to the emergency room.
She was burned over 16% of her body. 6% of the burns were third degree. She was in the hospital for a week.
Medical bills were $10,000, so Stella reached out to McDonald's and asked to be reimbursed.
We couldn't believe that this could happen over spilling the coffee. So we wrote a letter to McDonald's asking them to check the temperature of the coffee and to give recompense for the medical bills. And the response from McDonald's was an offer of $800.
Stella Liebeck had never sued anyone before Albuquerque attorney Ken Wagner took her case. Before they went to trial, they tried twice to settle out of court, but McDonald's refused.
We bought a product. It was used as intended. It was unreasonably hot and therefore unreasonably dangerous. And those were the essential facts.
I was not in it for the money. I was in it because I wanted them to bring the temperature down so that other people will not go through the same thing I did.
McDonald's policy was to serve coffee between 180 and 190 degrees. That's about 30 degrees warmer than most home coffee brewing machines. A burn expert testified that liquid at 180 degrees could cause third-degree burns within 15 seconds. Lawyers produced documents that showed that between 1983 and 1992, nearly 700 people claimed that they had been burned by hot coffee at McDonald's.
McDonald's was on big-time notice that they had a product that was dangerous and was burning people. We argued that to the jury, that they were callous and indifferent in simply not turning down a temperature.
An expert for McDonald's testified that burns are exceedingly rare, one for every 24 million cups of coffee served.
They just said it's statistically insignificant, and we're not going to change what we do.
People interact with hot beverages all the time in a fast food restaurant, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the restaurant is doing something wrong.
Attorney Tracy Jenks tried the case for McDonald's and argued that Mrs. Liebeck bore personal responsibility because she spilled the coffee on herself, and that McDonald's coffee wasn't any hotter than the coffee at other fast food restaurants. She said the reason the coffee was so hot was because that's what customers wanted.
McDonald's had a really, really strong reason for why they brewed their coffee at the temperature they did. It was an industrial standard based on the maximum extraction of the flavor and the maximum holding temperature.
But the jury saw how liquid at that temperature can scald when they were shown graphic photos of Mrs. Liebeck's burned groin.
The photos depicted where they had to graft the skin from the side of her legs to close the third-degree burn, and I think if people would have seen the severity of the burns, they would have realized it was not a laughing matter.
After 7 days of testimony and 4 hours of deliberation, jurors came up with a comprehensive answer to a complicated case. They unanimously agreed to award Stella $200,000 in compensatory damages, but because she caused the spill, they reduced that to $160,000. Jurors set punitive damages to send the message to McDonald's to turn down the temperature of the coffee.
I remember I could see Judge Scott going like this with his pencil, and I thought, oh, I hope he's counting digits on the verdict form. And he was.
They've done the revenue from 2 days of coffee sales, $2.7 million. The size of the award got the media's attention, but it overshadowed the rest of the story. Details of the case and the facts related to how the jury made its decision went mostly unreported.
Several days after the verdict, I had news crews from France, Japan, Germany in my driveway wanting to interview me. I mean, I was stunned.
After the verdict came in Wednesday, August 17th, the Albuquerque Journal ran the first story. The Associated Press and Reuters wire services then filed reports, and the story was picked up in dozens of newspapers worldwide. It became an international news event. But as the story's reach got bigger, the word count got smaller. In some papers, it was not more than a blurb.
697 words in the Albuquerque Journal became 349 words in the AP, and became as few as 48 words in various renderings by major metropolitan newspapers. 48 words can't explain a lot. And then Woman, Coffee, Millions sounds like a ripoff, not like a logical consequence of a thoughtful trial.
The report aired on more than a dozen national broadcasts and twice as many local news shows. The condensed telling of the story created its own version of the truth. Instead of pointing out she spilled the coffee in the passenger seat of a parked car, this was the new narrative.
It seems she was holding a cup between her legs while driving.
Clamped it between her legs, drove down the street, spilled it, burned herself, sued McDonald's, and collected.
Stella has received letters saying stuff like,
I was driving down the road. I had no business driving down the road with coffee between my legs and all that stuff. See, they're just plain ignorant.
My mother was made the villain in this story. It's like bullying. It feels like bullying.
I mean, it's not like the McDonald's person leaned over the car and poured it. It was an accident.
Very much like urban legends, it is a very compelling story. Once everybody decides what is true about something and the media has been sort of an echo chamber for it, then how do you deal with the fact that they might be wrong?
This documentary goes on for a few more minutes, and the site, the URL is listed here if you want to copy and paste and watch it again or watch the rest of it. It was interesting how that ended, that, you know, if the media says it enough times, we start believing it. So it's back to that question, how can we know what's right? How do we know that what we're finding in the news is actual truth? We look at how the media use this story, and we think about how interest groups must capitalize on this story. Oh, and here's a little bit of research I found. Why was the coffee so hot? Because it smells more when it's that hot, and the more people smell, the more they buy. That's why it was so hot. Okay, by now you've noticed we're talking about coffee, not about dessert torts. We're talking about something called tort reform. Now, I'm not going to get into this a lot, but it's just the idea of what the media does and why it does it. What is tort reform? It's a limiting by law of frivolous lawsuits. So this was an example of a frivolous lawsuit that several people in our government said, okay, we've got to put a stop to this to protect people. But who does it really protect? Well, it protects the big companies and it limits the individual. If you need more information on tort reform and how it limits the individual, here's another website with another video you can watch. But I don't want to get off topic because we're back to our question. Is it possible to know the truth? We've established that sources are misleading, especially prime news channels and news publications. They sensationalize. They always go for the bottom line, and the bottom line is money. And so truth doesn't always drive what they say, but money does. So please watch the following PowerPoint video to see more of how we can find sources that are good, that are reliable, and how we can evaluate the credibility of those sources.